Yes, it's very hard, especially nowadays to really break in. But the good thing is like there's so many different companies out there now to cut your teeth and really grind and get that hustle going because the more stars you create, the better opportunities you have. So it's really incredible to see how it's evolved and progressed over
Yeah,
time.
yeah, that's for sure. I started in the 90s, so I started it was the industry was pretty tough back then. You really had to know someone almost or be it's a lot of nepotism. You had to have a family member maybe in there or know somebody to even get a chance to get into pro wrestling at that time. And you had to have a certain look. Fortunately, I was a football player and I did some bodybuilding, amateur bodybuilding as a teen and had always been interested in exercise and weightlifting and sports. And, of course, a Schwarzenegger fan, as every kid my age was at that time. So, having that, advantage to be in sports, but breaking in the business was not easy. And, luckily we got in with, I knew Scott Hall. He was from the same town as me. We weren't friends or anything like that, but I knew him and asked him one time. I saw him at a gym. We were at Orange Avenue Gym, one of the oldest gyms in the country in Orlando. And just kind of said, hey, kind of what do we do to get in? And he really wasn't, to be honest, all that helpful because he did, it was very competitive, and you don't really want a lot of people coming into your business and taking your jobs. So, but we ended up getting into Steve Kern's school in Tampa, Florida. He had a school over there off of Tyson Drive, which was a big warehouse that I think was run by the Briscoes, if I'm not mistaken, at that time. And Steve was there with Jimmy Backlund and Ron Slinker and some kind of notable. The Nasty Boys came out of there, and we actually started our training there in Tampa.
Before we get into the wrestling aspect of everything, what was it about athletics that just was was like an escape for you? What was it
Yeah,
about it?
that's a great question, and it really was an escape. So one of the things, when you're living on a bus with eight people, you need to you don't have any room, you don't have anywhere to go sometimes. So sports was an outlet, and definitely an outlet for me with frustration and a lot of angst as a teen, as most teens have growing up, and that was a way for me to kind of express that and let that out. And it just so happened that football was the biggest sport in the little town. It's kind of like Friday Night Lights in Texas, so it was big in this part of Florida. And so all the cool guys got into football, and that's how you got the girls. And so I went into football too, and ended up, we had a good football program, and I played. For college, I played at Central Florida, University of Central Florida, as a linebacker and defensive end there. Thought I was going to go into the NFL, was kind of scouted, but nothing really happened. And then was working in a gym, really. I was a personal trainer, still had that whole, interest in exercise and fitness and wellness. And then it actually was my best friend, Clark Haynes, who was my tag team partner, Thunder, and I were both trainers at a training place, and he said, "Hey, let's do this professional wrestling. You want to try it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure," because I watched a little bit of wrestling growing up, like World Championship. It wasn't World Championship Wrestling back then. It was Florida Championship Wrestling. And I watched some of that with Gordon Soley and Dusty was in there and some other people. And we used to kind of play around with some moves, but I really wasn't a pro wrestling fan. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I want to do this. It was just really out of sheer coincidence that we decided to do it. And we went down to the school in Tampa and tried out. And then from then, I stayed in it. But it wasn't like something I mean, I'd always been into sports, but I just wasn't really necessarily. I amateur wrestled in high school, but I amateur wrestled in high school just to really stay in shape for football. My coach said, "Hey, I want you to wrestle," and I wrestled, and I liked wrestling. Amateur wrestling was I did learn a lot and it was good, but I did it to stay in shape and did it kind of for football. And when I went into pro wrestling, it was and to be honest with you, I really was convinced that pro wrestling was real, and that there was and it is very physical and it's real. I'm not saying it's not real. It's very hard to explain, and we can talk about it if you want. But at
Mhm.
the time when I got into it, I'm thinking, okay, and it was as athletic as I felt I was as a linebacker. You had to be pretty athletic in that position. Pro wrestling was one of the most challenging physical things to do because you had in football you can just let it all out. You can hit someone as hard as you can, right? In pro wrestling, if I hit you as hard as I can, we're not going to have a match after that. So you have to learn how to kind of work with someone in a way that you're looking as physical as you can, but you're not hurting them literally, right? And so
Yeah.
that's harder than you think. It's like it's very complicated and it's hard to explain to people. It's physical and you can't defy gravity. If someone picks you up and slams you, you can't make that look any less, right? But little tricks like tucking your chin so you don't bounce your head off the mat. You see guys slap the ring with their arms, kind of dissipate the blow, and learning how to fall and learning how to take the physical abuse. And it's like I used to tell people, if you jump out of an airplane with a parachute and you try to land on your legs, you're probably going to break your leg or twist an ankle or whatever because you don't know how to hit and roll, but they teach you that in the military. I wasn't in the military, although I played Cobra, but you have to learn how to take the fall. You have to learn how to take the bump, in a certain way. And that's training and you have to learn how to do that. So it's complicated.